streams.
Question number 2, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, does the Budget Policy Statement 2012 show that the government's proposed asset sales program would decrease the government's operating balance before gains and losses by nearly $100 million per year?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Budget Policy Statement sets out a number of measures of the impact of these sales, and it does show a decrease in the government's operating balance before gains and losses. It also shows a significant decrease of around between $5 to $7 billion in gross government debt. It also shows a positive effect on the government's cash because it pays more for debt than it gets in dividends from the 49% that it's selling. The conclusion, I think, of that is when you look at the measures of the impact of the 49% sale of shares, it's about neutral over the longer term, but of course we'll end up with less debt and better performing companies.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Minister agrees that the Treasury is forecasting that the government's asset sale program would increase the government deficit by $100 million a year, which has to be funded from somewhere, presumably by more debt.
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what we've said is the Treasury has done an estimate in the BPS. It's going to do another estimate. And I'd just make the same point again. There's a number of ways of measuring it. In the current environment, less debt is better when you see how toxic debt is around the world. And if we can avoid borrowing another $5 to $7 billion, then at the margin, when we're already a highly indebted country, we believe that is a good thing to achieve.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he agree that the reason why the government deficit will be $100 million a year worse as a result of privatisation is because the cost of borrowing is lower than the return on these assets, and hence the long-term effect of the privatisation will be to increase government debt because it has to fund the increased deficit?
The Honourable Bill English.
No, Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with that. The members is confusing a number of different measures of the impact, but can I put this to the member that if owning company, if the return on shares was guaranteed, then why isn't it Green Party policy to borrow hundreds of billions and buy all the companies on the stock exchange? Well, maybe it is. Maybe that is a policy, but that would be silly because there is no guarantee of those returns, but you can guarantee you have to pay the interest on debt.
Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Speaker, with the greatest respect, the Minister is on his feet theorising and speculating about some other political party's policy, which surely can't be his responsibility.
Order. The Minister wasn't saying anything about any political party's policies that I heard. He said, he perhaps shouldn't have said if you want to do something, but he said if, that's what he said, if you want to do that, then maybe you might as well borrow billions and buy a whole lot more companies. And I don't think he alleged that was any particular party's. Well, the member won't interject like that when I'm on my feet. If I'm wrong, I'll apologise to the member, but he doesn't need to interject like that. Courtesy in this House does matter. Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has the Minister seen what Roger Douglas admitted about the last round of privatisations when he said, "I'm not sure we were right to use the argument that we should privatise to quit debt. We knew it was a poor argument, but we probably felt it was the easiest to use politically."
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, no, I don't agree with that. There was a set of circumstances then that actually had some similarities to now. At the time, New Zealand had very high public debt, and our public debt cycles are over 30 years long. So once public debt goes up, it takes a long time to get it back down to where you started. This is one measure, but of course a more competitive economy, higher levels of growth, and the containment of government's expenditure are more important in the long run for containing debt. The sales of 49% in these companies will give us better performing companies. They will provide New Zealanders with some better longer term options for their increasing savings, and it will at the margin mean we borrow less money from volatile and difficult international debt markets.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't Roger Douglas saying here that the argument that says we have to privatise to reduce debt is not a good economic argument? The only role for that argument is, as Roger said, it was the easiest to use politically. That is, it is a political or a propaganda argument, not a good economic argument.
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know. You should ask Sir Roger.
The Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that his government has already clocked up a record $37 billion worth of debt in just 3 years, is it really responsible fiscal policy for the government to permanently lock in hundreds of millions of dollars of additional debt because of the increased deficit from privatisation?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I just don't accept the member's premise. The fact is that future income from these assets is uncertain, and that is always going to be the case because they are commercial businesses. Future costs of government debt are certain, and we are putting ourselves in the position that many other households and businesses have done across New Zealand, and that is get our debt down so we can reduce the certain interest costs. And we're doing that by selling to someone else 49% of assets that are actually a bit risky and whose incomes will fluctuate over the years.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that last time around, when the National and Labor governments previously embarked in this round of privatisation, and they used debt to justify that privatisation, is he at all concerned that one of the architects of that process, Roger Douglas, is now on the public record saying that we were wrong to use the argument that debt is the reason to privatise, that the reason we used that argument was for political purposes, it wasn't a good economic argument?
The Honourable Bill English.
No, it may surprise the member, but I take less notice of what Sir Roger Douglas says than he does. The fact is, there's a number of reasons why we believe this is an appropriate policy right now. One is that for one of the most indebted countries in the developed world, we can borrow less at the margin. The second is to provide better investment opportunities for New Zealanders who are increasing their savings. And thirdly, we can get better performing companies. And as that member will know himself, these are companies that may be seen positively by the market because of their renewable energy content. Let's see.
Point of order.
Point of order, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I seek leave to table a page from the book Out of the Woods by Reg Birchfield, which includes the quote from Roger Douglas that I've been using in question time about debt.
Leave sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is objection. Question number 3, Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to Minister.